Hey friends, welcome to Above the Fold podcast. I'm your host, Jess Servion. We're going to be talking about everything in your customer's journey. You're going to learn things about customer experience, brand experience, and marketing secrets that help you drive your brand success. So stay tuned, buckle up, and let's get into the episode.
Welcome back to another episode. I am joined today by Harry Gray, co-founder of the Meat Mafia.
Yeah.
I'd love for you, Harry, to honestly do your own introduction and tell people what the Meat Mafia is. Also, podcast, Noble, everything.
Totally. Yeah. So we're actually celebrating our 2-year anniversary of the Meat Mafia. So we actually launched the podcast 2 years ago, March 1st.
Yeah.
So I'm usually joined by Brett, who's my co-host. We have the podcast, the Meat Mafia podcast, centered around health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
So we both got into it. We both had these corporate jobs. We're looking to change things up. We had 4 months prior to starting the podcast, we had run this Ironman race together. We're both big into the fitness space, previously athletes. And we had this amazing experience together where we were like, we need to work together on something after this.
Yeah.
Like we had trained together, we did the race together. And then afterwards, we're like, there's too much good vibes between the two of us. We're too aligned on life and what we want out of life to just let this go to waste. So we actually ended up living together for 2 months after that and formulating the Meat Mafia. And it was very organic in terms of how it started. So the Meat Mafia is a podcast. And I had just left my job 3 months prior to getting down to Austin for this race. And I was working on a project with an entrepreneur down here in town, and it was a marketplace, and it was going to be in the health and wellness space. And I was just kind of struggling to get started. And so I was like, what do I need to do in order to make this marketplace work? It's a chicken and the egg. You need people to post on this marketplace, and then you also need to get customers to it.
Yeah.
So I started writing online, and I started writing about the food system. And as soon as I did that for a week, Brett joined me. And so we both were writing online under these anonymous accounts on Twitter. And we were just telling these stories about the food system. And pretty quickly, like within the first few weeks, we started seeing some of our tweets go viral. And we realized we had something. And we were really mimicking what Sahil Bloom had done in the finance space. So he was, or not finance, but more so like entrepreneur space, where he had created this content engine where he was telling these long stories, giving frameworks, giving historical context to leaders who had done things or entrepreneurs who had done things a certain way. And we're like, that's really interesting. And no one is doing that in the health space, really. So we just adapted that model, started writing. And after 2 months, we realized that there was something there. So we started the podcast 2 months after starting writing online. And that was really, for the next 6 months, our major focus. Brett was still working a full-time job. I was fully doing this. And that was our main focus, just kind of developing this platform and seeing where it could go. And then fast forward 2 years, we've done 280 episodes of the podcast. And now we have a supplement company, Noble Origins, which is basically us answering the question that we were getting most on the show, which is where can we get really high quality protein from? Mm-hmm. So we launched a product last April. And the idea was that we wanted to create like the athletic greens, but for animal-based. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the animal-based diet, but it's like...
actually am, because
okay, cool.
I have a client who, I'm not going to name names in it, but I actually have a client who's like in a similar scope.
Okay.
And like also an influencer in the space.
Sweet. So. Yeah, so the animal-based diet is basically the opposite of a plant-based diet. Your core calories are coming from animal products, and there really wasn't anything that was just like a one scoop, everything you need concept.
Yeah.
And so we were like, hey, we can kind of position this product more towards further away from like the ancestral crowd, which I think there's a lot of great brands out there that cater towards the ancestral crowd. It's like, barefoot, basically caveman stuff, but it's very niche. And we wanted to more so try to popularize the idea of what an animal-based diet is, just because there's a lot of conflicting opinions, especially in like the health and wellness space around what you should and shouldn't be eating. And so our whole message with the show is eat real foods, and that is like the bedrock of a really healthy life and really healthy diet. So, we just thought this idea of this one scoop protein powder would be a great place for us to start. We had a bunch of other ideas that we were thinking about running with when we were first launched. But
well, do you think you're going to add those other ideas to this or no?
Definitely. I think what's really cool about starting from the creator side first is you build out the platform, you build out some distribution.
Yeah.
And then all these ideas pop up where you're like, we can do that. The the challenge is not overdoing it, which is definitely Brett and mine's problem, where we like want to do everything at once.
Yeah.
So just trying to really like be realistic with when we could launch other things. But you see it with other influencers in the space, like Paul Saladino. He started Heart and Soil, and then he recently just launched a company called Lineage.
Yeah.
You see the power of a platform, right? Like where Paul starts putting out content, and then he's able to launch a brand, and then he's able to launch his second brand. And obviously it's really easy to get shiny object syndrome when you want to create things that your audience is asking for or that you see an opportunity for. But I think where we're at right now is like, let's just focus on the two things that we have going right now.
Yeah.
Really get it to a point where we feel good about both. Like we have a lot of room to grow with both. Just tweaking certain things, and we've had great guests on, and I think that there's still a lot of, no pun intended, meat on the bone with the podcast where you like that?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Where I've used it before, so it's like kind of
it's kind of part of his brand voice now.
Cheap. Yeah. But there's definitely a lot of things that I've seen, and it's interesting just looking back over 2 years. You see where you miss certain things and where you could have capitalized a little bit more. Yeah. And I think slowing down is now something that I'm trying to turn into a strength, where it's like you don't always need to be going 100 miles an hour to feel like you're being productive. Like sometimes you're one decision away from having that big unlock, and I'm trying to tap into that more so than trying to do a million different things at once.
Yeah. Well, I think what's so interesting, and just to like the audience, and if you're like viewing in or listening in, what's really interesting about this conversation is coming from the creator space to then making the product, right? So much of like what we talk about on this pod is like creating the company and doing the things, right? And like I come from the creator space. Like my first e-commerce company that I worked at was Feastables, right? So like I built CX and like the digital marketing and retention and community, all these things from the inside of the house.
Yep.
But what was really interesting is, and I mean, granted, these are like different scopes on the creator side, but like what's really interesting on the Mr. Beast side is that, you know, he wanted to create this product. So we come in as like the heavy hitters and like e-com as operators, right? We build it, we do the things. But then as the company like starts getting more successful and stuff, and then like that creator mindset flips of like, oh no, I need to like put like more effort into this. Or what you were saying, like be a little bit more methodical about, and like slow down a little bit, not like, oh, I gotta go put this product out in the market right now, right?
Totally.
But I think what's interesting and where I really want to dive in with you is like, in that initial stage, like that rush stage to get it to the market.
Yep.
What was it about your content and the feedback from, you know, people? I mean, I know that it was like the natural progression, but what was that aha moment like, oh shit, like this one piece, or like, we really got to put this out into the market because, and I really think like, we're going to acquire the customer really quickly. I don't know, like what, just give me like a...
You're saying from the content standpoint.
Yeah, like for you as a creator.
Yeah.
I've created the stuff, I've done the things, now I'm going to go build the product.
Yeah, I think the turning point for us was realizing that we had a genuine community.
Yeah.
Not just people who were tuning in for one-off pieces. Like we felt like we had gone to a bunch of in-person events, and we just started realizing that there was like a lot of dialogue happening, and we were actually meeting people in person and taking it from virtual to actually building real in-person community. So it made it a lot more tangible in terms of the fact that like these people are real, and that these people are showing up much more for the content and us than just kind of like getting content and going somewhere else. So I don't know if there was one particular moment, to be honest.
Yeah.
We really started talking with some mentors and just feeling like a product, even if we didn't have everything dialed in on the content side and we didn't have like a truly sticky or as truly sticky and engaged community as we thought we did, just having something at the bottom of our funnel, so to speak, to steer people towards outside of just the show would be really powerful. And we felt like we could get something to market, and it didn't even need to be a home run right away, but just something that we could get to market and then grow with the show would be a really powerful offering.
Yeah, I know. I think it's like honestly, just from like that content creator, and then having like like, okay, I've created the content, I've done the things.
Yeah.
Now here's my physical product that you can purchase. And we talk about this a lot about the creator influencer space. Like honestly, the podcast I just recorded before you was actually with a gal who does she's the director of marketing for Top of the Morning Coffee.
Oh, cool.
For Jack Septic Eye. But same creator space, right?
Yeah.
And like what's really interesting is that about the consumers, they want a piece of the pie of the creator, right?
Mhm.
So it's like if you look at like Kim Kardashian and all that stuff. Here's another episode of me talking about Kardashians. Don't kill me. But if you think about it, it's like you put out the content, you do the things, and then you give them the actual product. And like what everybody talks about is like that acquisition. It's like so easy to acquire that customer. But I'm curious on your end and from your point of view, is it really like not the acquisition? Do you find retention and retaining that customer harder or easier?
Yeah, I think it's easier in some ways. We haven't had to spend nearly as much in terms of going out and like putting ad dollars behind a bunch of things and really doing things outside of organic social media growth,
Yeah.
which I think is a really powerful thing when you're thinking about growing a business. It's like we don't necessarily need to spend anything other than our time and sharing the knowledge that we already have
Yeah.
to acquire customers. So that model is powerful, but it also means that you are kind of like the spoke, the center spoke. So there is, no place where like in some companies you can like remove yourself and then elevate yourself out of it. Like you have to be the center of a lot of the things.
Yeah.
Which is a good and bad problem to have. I think it's good at the beginning because it allows you to have your fingerprint on everything. But I think at a certain point and this is where I think a lot of businesses are tending toward or moving towards in the creator space is like, how do you create a product that has your brand and likeness to it and your message behind it, but you don't necessarily need to be like in the weeds on it day to day. And that's like, I mean, Brett and I probably made the good and bad decision of wanting to be the operators of our CPG brand.
I think it's actually a good decision.
Yeah.
Just being an operator in the creator space. I'm going to be honest with you. Like a lot of creators are not involved.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. And we just wanted the experience. Like we both had business backgrounds. We went to business school or undergrad business school, and we're both in corporate jobs and wanted to just have that entrepreneurial experience of like getting a product to market, starting to work on sales, customer retention, what the marketing behind building a brand actually looks like. And we've learned a ton. Like it's been like drinking out of a fire hose.
Dude,
but at the same time, now if we go start another product, it's like going to be 10x what we've done so far with Noble just in the beginning stage, because we understand the full bringing a product to market experience. We understand the nuts and bolts of like what we need to do to actually grow a brand.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that I think we would have missed if we had just been like hiring somebody on or bringing in a third partner, which we did. We brought in a third partner to help us get things off the ground, but we were really involved with, the branding and a lot of the sales and marketing side of things. So just being able to get the insight into the operations and everything has been huge. And I think it will serve us well going forward.
No, I mean, honestly, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Like I think that, just in that, like coming from like, I don't want to keep saying creator and influencer. It's more so just coming from the content first space, right? I think it's really important that you don't lose sight of like that content piece that you've built, like that brand that you've built there, right?
Definitely.
And so being involved in the creation of your product, like whether it's branding and marketing and like the entire experience of your product for your consumer, right? Is so important. And it's better to not necessarily hand it off. Like sometimes like some of these companies, like you definitely need more people than just like 2 or 3, right?
Totally.
Like, but I think what's really important is that you're actually in those meetings and you're like a part of the process and not just handing it off to somebody else.
Yeah, totally.
I've seen that a lot.
Totally. And there's there's a part of some context with our story too, which I think is really interesting, is the podcast has lended us to have other founders on the show.
Yeah.
So we've been able to have deep dive conversations selfishly with some of these amazing founders. Like one conversation that stands out to me is the founder of Create Gummies. He came on our show and he's a full one-man show. He built Create Gummies, Creatine Gummy, to $1 million in monthly revenue within a year. And it just goes to show the direction that e-com can really go in, where there will be a single creator and single business owner, solo entrepreneur who ends up being a billionaire because he's able to outsource certain things to agencies and leverage overseas help and create a company that isn't necessarily a company, but it's this full-blown system that doesn't need to have a huge amount of overhead in order to operate.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. And I mean, like, here's the thing is like, I'm a brand experience, customer experience marketing girl. Like, so it's like, for me, I genuinely care about the consumer behavior or like the emotionality of like a customer wanting and keeping to like want the product, you know? So I think it's like the supply chain aspect of it is one, like getting your product, doing the things. I think the product marketing is one, the R&D, like all of those pieces. But I also think that and I see a lot of brands do this, like they miss the mark on the customer experience piece of it. It's like I put the product out, but I'm only really selfishly thinking about like me and like what I want, but not, rather than the sustainability and the growth of like my consumer. Does that make sense? So it's like, so like as children brands, for instance, right? Like children brands, you might be a creator coming out and saying like, okay, my audience is maybe like, 6 to 13-year-olds, right? And I'm gonna like put out a lollipop, right? I know it's candy, and I swear to God, I'm not like, this is not related to the other, but like, just stick with me here, audience, okay? So, anyways, my audience is 6 to 13 years old, but the thing is, like, those children, like, they fall out at some point, right? Like they age out of that, right? So I think the other important piece when you're creating a brand is thinking through that consumer behavior, that consumer research of how you're going to continuously sustain your business as people age out of it. And I know that's different in like children, but even adults, like even as adults, we have like the attention span of like a 3-year-old sometimes. You know?
We ran into this problem a little bit, or it was a very clear decision that we had to make whether or not we wanted to make a product that was very much attached to the show. So like create like the Meat Mafia protein powder, or keep it just really branded as similar to what we had already created. And we decided to go the other way, create a brand that was, if someone was coming to a supermarket, we're in Central Market, Noble Origins is in Central Market. Someone who's never listened to the show could easily see our product and buy it. But I think we were going through the whole iterations of, do we want this thing to be something that can live beyond the show? And I think that was kind of us taking the long-term view where it's like, yes, we're probably going to lose out on some people who are listening to the show and don't necessarily pay attention enough, like you were talking about, to like everything that we're saying, to realize that this protein powder is our protein powder. So it all does come down to the messaging and just like really trying to wrap your hands around your audience and making sure that they know like every little thing that you're doing. But also, I think there's some power in creating things that aren't necessarily directly attached to the platform that you've built. It's very clearly related. Like if you're paying attention, I think it's very obvious that Noble Origins is a part of what the Meat Mafia is doing. But if you're like just a passive consumer of what we're doing, or you just came in for one episode because you knew the person who we had on the show, it might not be all that obvious.
How do you, I actually have multiple questions, but
hit me.
First question is, so like you've created content, you've created like education, right? Through your content, right? But when you're putting in a product out there and you are being discovered by somebody new, maybe somebody who came on the show that's then picking up your product, how do you, from the shelf or even from like digital site, keep people educated in like the benefits of using your product?
Yeah, I think it's something we're really working through right now, honestly. Like through the Meat Mafia side of things, we have a ton of educational content, and our whole idea is try to educate and inspire people to be healthier. And then have that transition over to what we're doing with Noble Origins, which I actually feel like we probably haven't done enough of the education through Noble, through the mouthpiece of Noble Origins, the brand. So it's really a matter of us building out the right systems and flows and making sure that we're not just watering one part of what we're building and then completely ignoring the education piece from Noble Origins. And I think, Heart and Soil is a perfect example of that, where they do an amazing job of communicating with their customers, educating them, literally coaching some of them, like bringing them on board and giving them all the access and information. I think for us, a lot of it comes through the content. So we write a lot on Twitter for Noble Origins. And so that's kind of our most upstream content engine. And then we try to just disseminate that information across all the other platforms. So once it's worked on Twitter, we're like, okay, let's repurpose this over to Instagram. And that's where we've kind of found like our base, like that's kind of our phase one in terms of education. But we grow and over time, I certainly see that being a bigger part of what we're doing and building out a little bit more of a team around just the education piece for Noble Origins, because people are going to come to the product and not have a single clue who the Meat Mafia is. And so we want it to be this two-way window where we're getting listeners to our show because people found our product, and people are listening to the show and then they find our product.
Right. Yeah. I think that's really smart. I think you have to be that two-way window.
Definitely.
It's like you gotta water both sides of the lawn,
Totally.
How big is your team right now?
So one piece I left out. So we have a marketing agency that we created in between us launching the show and launching Noble, because it was me and Brett, and we were just trying to figure out ways to monetize the show. When you have a smaller show that's getting good guests and getting exposure, you're like borderline able to get people to sponsor the show. So we had some sponsors here and there come and go. They're like, we love what you guys are doing, but like this just like doesn't really make sense for us. So we needed to figure out another way to get money in the door while we were like just bootstrapping everything, quite frankly. And so we started doing some freelance work for some of the brands that we had on the show who really liked our messaging, really liked our voice. And we were in their niche and we could speak to very nuanced points about the topics that they wanted to speak about. And they're like, we haven't been able to find writers who can do any of this work and speak in the voice that we actually want our brand to have. And so some of the brands that we worked with were pretty deep in like the carnivore space. And so you need to understand that community and be in that community in order to write for that community. You can't just outsource that to somebody else. Who's like, some ghostwriter, some random ghostwriter. Like there's enough of a nuanced takes that you just need to know where the boundaries are. So you don't piss people off. So
and it's not something you could just chat GPT.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So
Sometimes
you need to live
BT. Chat BT. Anyway, no, you have to live it. Like I agree with you. I think a lot of these wellness products are very nuanced. Ironically enough, like a lot of my like advising and fractional clients in the past have all been wellness, right? And then like even for me to come from like slang and chocolate, or even like a B2B background before the slang and chocolate, I had to like learn a lot of stuff, and it was a lot of educating myself. But I think the one tactical piece of advice here is not whether it's wellness, whether it's whatever, even outsource, don't outsource, internal, is that you have to find people who are really passionate about learning.
Definitely.
And what you're slanging. So I think for y'all, like that initial stage, you need that. Like, and people hired you for the marketing agency because you're so passionate about it already.
Definitely.
And
like the community that we were speaking to and writing to, they're very informed themselves. Like it's a very knowledgeable community. Most of the people in that community have gotten there because they had some sort of health problem and they've done thousands of hours of their own research. So they understand the space very well. So you can't there's no pulling the wool over the eyes of people who are first principle thinkers for the most part, very much want to do their own research. And they just kind of believe in minimalism when it comes to their diet and lifestyle. Like they're not looking to add on a bunch of different supplements. They're not looking to add on a bunch of different things that, might be CPG brands. Like they just want to keep it simple. They want to eat real foods. And so really there's so much nuance with that. And it makes it kind of a challenging customer segment to go after.
Totally.
Because they really they don't want to be sold on a lot of things. They really are just trying to eat like a very simple diet. And when we had these brands coming in that have some CPG products that are super minimal ingredient, like it's genuinely or generally just like beef, salt, honey, like these basic little products that they had created, there was still even like, where is this sourced from? Like what farm is this sourced from? Things like that.
I was just
so
gonna get
this is like the details that you need to be as educated as your audience, if not more, to be able to write that sort of content for them.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I know I keep going back to this, but in the wellness industry, like I've just noticed this across like so many of my clients that I've helped, like on the CX space, right? In the community space is that those nuanced questions are so insane. Like
totally.
They're so insane. I've seen questions like how much levels of like folic acid and da 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 da, and like the agents are like, what?
Yeah.
Like, how do I answer this?
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
And the only way to combat those things is like, for one client, I had to create a library of all the nuanced questions and actually implement AI, teach the AI to answer the questions.
Wow.
Because the AI will remember.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, I can get real meta up in here.
Yeah, it's really important though. And I think the show has allowed us to keep our hand on the pulse. And
Yeah.
Brett and I have both been involved. Like we've been doing this diet and lifestyle thing for a while. We were both college athletes and I think he had a health problem where he had ulcerative colitis. So he went through the whole process of being on prescription medicine and then getting off that. And so he did a ton of research on his own. He's just experimented a bunch. I've experimented a bunch. So between the two of us, like over 20, 30 years of experimenting with diet and lifestyle, we understand like where the different pockets of the communities are and like where the boundaries are. So it's good to just know that when you're creating content for our own brands or other brands, like you need to understand where the boundaries are. So you're not like, sometimes you want to provoke do some engagement baity stuff. So you need to be able to think from that perspective, but also understand that you're not going to put things out there that misrepresent or like, make the brand seem like they don't know what they're talking about. Like that's
well, I
a
also,
non-starter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like not even just like from a brand perspective, like anything that you're putting out there, if like you're coming from like a content piece of it, or as a marketer, like whatever you put your name on from even a personal brand perspective, right? Whatever you put your name on, that better be top notch. Like
totally
your emails that you're sending out must be like top notch, everything.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. Someone asked me this question the other day about if I had brought any of my corporate experience to the entrepreneurial world.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because I was working in finance, real estate finance, doing investment management before. So totally different.
You're like,
yeah, I'm like, it sucks.
Corporate America, woo.
But there was a lot of valuable lessons that I learned. And one of them is just professionalism. And I think that Brett and I both will have taken that to the entrepreneurial world, where a lot of people in the entrepreneurial world are used to just like hustling, and there might be like a little bit more of an inclination to be less professional. So I think there is something to bring a certain level of professionalism to the agency and to Noble and things like that I think have been really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I've also come from like a corporate world previously before startups. So like, it's really interesting, actually. Like now that we're here, I came from so I went to art school, then I went to corporate world, then I went to startups, and then I went to Feastables. And I remember walking into Feastables, and I was like employee 4, right?
Wow.
I remember walking into Feastables, employee 4, right, with like this like very startup background, but it was like B2B startup, right? So it's like tech. And yeah, like nothing was like crazy. Like startup world is like, pretty like lax, but like we get things done, right? And I remember walking into Feastables and just being in our old CEO, Jim, shout out to him, but he would always tell me, I would be like, but I can't say it like this. And he would always be like, just be authentic, man. And so I feel like now have found this balance of like corporate Jess, but authentic Jess.
Totally.
Like the person you guys get like on this pod is like authentically me.
This is you.
100% like psychopath me. But like I used to like kind of be a little buttoned up.
Yeah.
But now I can't be,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was the same way, it's like you're working in a totally different environment. But I learned a ton, just like how to structure myself and be organized and how to communicate with people in a way where they actually want to work with you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good takeaways from corporate America. I think it gets bastardized a lot, and for good reason. Like I think that there's a lot of people's souls that they end up compromising on when they're working in a job that maybe they grow out of or they stay in too long. Like that was certainly the case for me, where I kind of felt like I stopped growing and then stayed there for too long, and then I was like, oh, I'm kind of bitter about where I've ended up. I was more so just like myself too, like I'm not willing to just like move on and find something different.
Yeah. You get like stuck in that like,
yeah, for sure.
It's stable, but you're just like stuck.
And that's the thing. It's like designed to make you really have those hard questions where it's like, well, my bonus comes in here and I might get a pay raise in March, so I stick it out till March, and then you're like looking at the next cycle of promotions and pay raises, and you just get caught in it. And I think if you're not really aware and really mindful of like where you're at,
Yeah.
then you can, blink and you're like 28, which
I
is
know.
like basically where I was.
Yeah.
You're like, oh man, this is not, I don't want to be here in 10 years. So I need to make a decision quickly.
Yeah. Well, do you think that's like an entrepreneurial mindset though that we have? Like, and sorry, I was like, let me gear that up a little bit differently. Cause I think that like that corporate life, a lot of people really love it. And they're like, I wouldn't say love it, but they're like, they're okay with the stability. They're okay with like, okay, I'm going to get this bonus check and I'm going to do all these things. But when you were saying that, like, to be honest with you, I was thinking in my head, I was like, I don't even know the last time I got a bonus. Like, because to be honest with you, I just create my own bonuses. And what I mean by that is like, I'm doing multiple things at multiple times all the time.
Definitely.
While I was at Feastables, I started an agency, right? I created an agency and, then I left Feastables and I joined Customer and now I'm doing content, right? And like my agency is like self-running on its own. Like I hired a team to do those things, but now I'm thinking about building a brand at some point, like I'm constantly creating my own bonuses.
Yeah.
But I think it's because, and I don't, again, like I don't mean this egotistically like at all. I just think it's like, I call it psychopath mode, but I really get bored. And then I want to challenge myself even more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that pursuit, like when I find myself kind of maybe creatively exhausted to a point where like I've built something and I'm like happy with where it's at, or like I'm working in a job and I feel like I've kind of like tapped into all the growth that I'm going to get out of it. There's definitely that point where you're like, I just want to be doing a lot more things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely the type of person who likes to have a lot of different creative plugs to plug into. Mm-hmm. So, and challenging different skills too. So you're not growing just in one way. Like the podcast is a great medium for me to work on speaking, working on asking good questions, interpersonal skills, booking clients, and like that whole rush of booking guests and having that whole rush of like getting a good guest. And then on the agency side of things, a lot of it's like pursuing new clients and client management and things that are a totally different skill set than what we're doing on the podcast. And then Noble is much more like consumer facing and trying to work on the touch points that you seem like you've had in your career, where it's like, what's the customer experience going to be like with this? How do we message this properly to the customer? So there's so many different hats that you end up wearing when you start doing things for yourself that you can make it. It's like create your own adventure. Like
I know
it's so exciting once you kind of like, get out of that. And it took me a little while to kind of get out of that like corporate DNA where I'm like, there's structure and all these things. Like, no, every single opportunity that comes your way is going to be happening because you put the work in and you did it. So you need to create the structure and go find the opportunities that you want to pursue. Yeah. And it makes it really exciting. It also makes it so that you have to really dial yourself in. I don't think there's a better self-improvement tool than entrepreneurship.
No, not at all. But I also think it goes back to like health and wellness too.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, trust me, I'm more busy than I've ever been in my life, right? But I'm passionate about the things. Like I'm passionate about gassing customer up and like helping with like, build that company. I'm also passionate about my agency. I'm passionate about this podcast, like all these things, right?
Yeah.
And like, some days I'll sleep 6 hours. Some days I'll sleep 10.
Yeah.
Right? Some days I'll sleep 2.
Yeah.
But like I wake up every day like super excited and happy to like jam out.
Yeah.
And not go into a fucking cubicle.
Yeah. There was I was at this really interesting talk yesterday. So South by Southwest is going on in Austin. Now there's all these events. Yeah. And I got invited to one yesterday and it was talking about the window. And it's this concept of where you're operating at your best. It's called the window. And it's essentially flow state where you're in the zone, you're locked in, like you're working on a project and you can just go super deep. You don't get distracted. You're working out of a place of abundance and you're just like excited to do the work. And then when you fall outside of that window, it's like on the high end, it's hyper. So you're much more disparate in your thinking. You're a little bit distracted, maybe anxious, lots of thoughts, overwhelmed. And on the low end of the window, it's hypo, which is you're a little bit more isolated, feeling maybe a little bit more depressed, a little bit slower, feeling stuck. And it's a really interesting frame for entrepreneurs. And I think people in general, like if you're just trying to operate at a high level, just asking yourself the question, how do I get into that window and just stay in that window for as long as possible? So I'm doing things that I'm actually really excited about. And I feel like I'm present. I'm doing the work that I'm best at and I'm providing the highest value at.
Yeah. Well, okay, going back to the agency thing, right? Like, because I've never heard about it in that concept, and that like now I'm like, dang, why couldn't we have met like a day before? Because I would have gone to that with you, right?
Dude,
But like,
so good.
I
She was. Have you seen Billions?
no, but I
All
should.
right, so anyone who's
Should I
listening,
watch
yeah,
it?
you should definitely watch
Okay.
it. Yeah, it like definitely scratches an itch for people who are entrepreneurial and like
Okay.
it's a really good show. But there's a lady on the show, I think her name is Wendy. I watched it a while ago. Wendy, and she's a psychologist who helps out with all the C-suite people and all the people within the organization. She helps work on them personally and like help them identify blind spots.
Yeah.
And she's just like helping move the business forward by building up the people who are making decisions and people who are stressed out working in the business and not spending enough time on working on themselves.
Yeah.
And so there's a nice healthy balance of that. But this lady is Wendy. Like she's incredible. Yeah.
I say I love that. Man, there's so many things I want to say, but like about that like abundance piece of it though, because I have shifted my mentality to like I spent a lot of time at Feastables. Like I built that company with my peers, right? Like
So epic.
like from the ground up, right? So that was my baby. That was like my baby, right? And I battled with like leaving it because it was just my time. Like I just knew it was my time. Like the business was like is doing phenomenal. Like it's just changed. Like it's predominantly retail rather than D2C. And like, you know, I'm a CX and brand experience girl and a marketer, and like I want to like do the fun things, right?
Right.
But at the beginning stages, like I'm a 0 to 4 type of gal.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, the beginning stages is so much fun.
Oh,
it's so much fun.
it is so much fun.
Just like
Yeah.
there's certain people who are designed for it. And it's like you like uncertainty because you can create creative solutions to overcome some of these very uncertain problems. You create the boundaries around what you're making. Like there's magic in that 0 to 4 stage.
And the failing and getting back up and figuring it out and pivoting your plans.
Yeah.
And I mean, talk about consumer research, right? Like
Totally.
that Feastable story, like when we launched, like I didn't have a customer. We launched on January 29th of 2022. We didn't have one customer until the day we turned on the lights, right? And then we started learning. I don't want to say we started learning about the consumer, and then we started pivoting things, and then we started like putting more bricks on top of the bricks, right? But that stage of like understanding your business and like being like, oh, okay, this worked, maybe this didn't work. Oh, let's go do this. And like you pivot the plans and you change them, and like to really get the formulation of the company is so massive, and it's just so fun and psychotic.
Oh,
I love it.
It's the best. And I think that the reason this is like more of a personal insight, but like the reason I feel like I stayed in my corporate job too long is because I have a high pain tolerance.
Yeah.
And I think that also is like a very great skill to have in the early innings of doing anything entrepreneurial where you're just you're getting kicked in the teeth. Things aren't always going perfectly, but you do need to be able to just withstand and, you know, be adaptable.
Yeah.
Flexibility, malleability,
I mean,
all the
those
things.
kicked in the teeth moments are like working 16-hour days.
Totally.
Like you live and breathe it, and you're like, fuck, this isn't working out. But you get back up and you do it over and over.
Yeah, you realize you get this sense, and tell me if you feel similarly, but you get this sense that you're just like really close all the time. Like you're just like, oh, we're like one little thing away. You know, like, and that I think that feeling is very addicting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
All the time. Wait, okay, hold on. Going back to the abundance thing, I just wanted to say this because it's the reason we got onto that ramble moment was because so it was really hard for me to decide to leave Feastables, right? And it was really hard because of like stepping into the unknown of like, okay, I've had this like psychotic moment for so long. And then I was like very worried about at the time of making that decision, like it didn't have like opportunities on the table, right? But I was like, I wanted to just kind of trust in the abundance box, right?
Totally.
Of like and just from my mindset, my individual mindset was like, I feel like I want to trust in the universe a little bit here, but also a trust in just like what is meant for me will be for me. And like that abundance ended up coming. Right. And so, but living in that space of kind of like, okay, yes, I have to work hard and I have to like do the things and make them happen. But like, abundance isn't about the dollars anymore. Abundance is about the opportunities that can arise. So like, I don't care if like, and maybe this is probably, I will never be a billionaire. I keep joking about this, but like, I don't give a shit if it's $1 that I'm making or, $1 million. Am I happy? That's what I care about. Am I passionate? And like, and then that's when abundance comes. That's when like I'll have more than enough money or whatever it is,
Totally. Yeah, it's funny you say that because for the longest time, I was always using like fun as the metric of success for what we were doing because there weren't really dollars coming in the early days of the show.
Yeah.
And it's important to make sure that you understand that people are going to be listening to a podcast that you're putting out there and like they need to be hearing someone who genuinely loves what they're doing.
Right.
So I was just trying to be tuned into that feeling of like, this is where I'm supposed to be at. And Brett and I both really felt like we had lightning in the bottle. We're like, this is exactly where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And that presence of just day to day working on something and knowing that no matter what's happening on the outside, like money's not coming in, savings is, dwindling away.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to start thinking in the future of like, future problems, which they're just going to happen. Like problems are going to happen. And as soon as you accept that, it allows you to just really stop over calculating for the future and start making decisions today that you can actually tangibly make and do and operate on.
Yeah.
And that like changes the future outcome. And so a really powerful thing for me has just been believing that, you are where you're supposed to be and just trying to operate from the present moment more so than, looking too far down the line.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I think another powerful thing for me also has been, when we talk about that like abundance piece is that like not just necessarily trusting and like passion, but also like partnerships might come into your wheelhouse. And sometimes it's not always a dollar amount associated with that partnership.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like a connection, right?
Yeah.
For me, I know a lot of people like who partner or like introduce. I like to kind of like be a connector in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I like to connect so much is because that brings me a little bit of abundance in the sense of like karma will get me back, and I'm not trying to like be woo woo. It's just like, I'm literally saying like the way my mentality is like, if I connect somebody to somebody at some point, like that connection might lead me down another path.
Definitely. Yeah. There's like a biblical principle in there where it's like give first and serve others. And that in itself will create more for you in the long game. So I think that there's some power to that for sure.
Yeah. So abundance can be all sorts of different forms, but I think in just entrepreneurship, it's not just always about like, I have to make this $1. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what are you actually passionate about being an entrepreneur?
Yeah. It's easy to get misguided too when you start looking at every decision through the lens of dollars, because a lot of times for us, the things that we didn't see coming, the bigger opportunities came on the back end of making decisions that weren't dollar derived, like hosting an event in Nashville last year. We didn't make a penny off of it, but we are now employing 2 of the people who are core to our team because they showed up to the event and they were amazing people. And now they're on our team and they're creating value and letting us spend time on things that we want to spend time on. And we've gotten connected with other podcast guests through there, and multiple other people were creating business opportunities through us hosting that event. So when you look at things purely from a dollar perspective, you can get lost. And we had Michael Bostic on our podcast a little while back, and we met up with him recently. And one of the things that he said to us that I think in the context of that event, it kind of validated us doing the event for no money, which he said, these events are just like advertising. Like if you make $0 on the event, that's totally fine.
Absolutely.
It's free advertising for your brand. And it's a great way to not necessarily have to spend any money, and you have an in-person event and you have connection with real people who are ultimately just going to be brand ambassadors down the road. Like your most loyal audience is going to show up to that event and care and connect with you guys on a deeper level. And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's building community.
Yeah.
It's building community in so many different aspects. It's like the brand ambassador aspect.
Definitely.
It's the connections, the partnerships, the finding podcast guests, or even, other people that you can employ like later down the line. Like this is all pieces of like building a community under the Meat Mafia. Like, and for me, it's like under the Juice. It's like, or just Jess, right? Like my community even. I mean, you and I have like so many connections that we're going to talk about offline in a minute.
Totally.
my friend, like, it doesn't even feel like it, but we're actually at the end of the road.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Like,
Like
I
we
just
got started.
I know. I literally looked at the time.
That's
Well,
unreal.
I'll have to have you come back on.
Let's do it.
And bring Brett.
I'll bring Brett.
And we'll vibe again.
100%.
Because there's like way more questions I want to even ask you.
Yeah, we would love to come back on. This is awesome. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, where can the crowd find you?
So we are the Meat Mafia, or Meat Mafia Media on Instagram. I'm Meat Mafia Harry on Twitter. That's where a lot of our magic happens, is on Twitter. We're kind of like Twitter native. And then the Meat Mafia podcast on Spotify and Apple. And then Noble Origins on Instagram, or nobleorigins.com is where you can find our product. So yeah.
Cool. I'm going to link everything in the show notes. And to all of you out there, whether you're listening or viewing, I really appreciate you. And I will see y'all next Thursday. Toodles.
Dang, we've made it to the end of the podcast and you're still here. So thank you so much for listening to Above the Fold podcast. For the best of this episode and every episode, be sure to follow us on Instagram and my YouTube channel. And for deeper dives on the secrets to brand success, don't forget to subscribe to my weekly newsletter, Sunday Postcards. All right, my dudes and gals, see you next week.